Rain fell like punishment from the sky, sharp, relentless, cold. The narrow alley between the abandoned train depot and a collapsed parking garage was little more than a trench now, rushing with muddy water and scattered debris. In the chaos of the storm, most people were rushing home, hailing cabs, or cursing the flooded sidewalks. But under a gnarled tree that had no business still standing, two tiny shapes clung to each other for dear life. They were girls. Barely 10. Twins, though anyone could tell just by the identical bone-thin arms, matted hair, and fear-etched eyes. Their names were Lila and Lacey, and the world hadn't used those names in months. They had no home. No one waiting for them. And now, the storm threatened to wash them away like trash on the street. Lila held onto the tree with one numb hand, the other wrapped around her sister. "Don't fall asleep," she whispered hoarsely. "Stay awake, Lacey." Lacey didn't answer. Her lips were turning blue. That was when they heard it, footsteps. Ava Monroe, soaked to the bone and gripping a ruined umbrella, cursed under her breath. "This isn't the right bus stop," she muttered. She had just come from the city employment office. Another rejection. Another door closed. She was once a pediatric nurse. Not long ago, her days were filled with laughter, charting medications, and hugging scared children after IVs. Now, she was broke. Unemployed. And walking the wrong way home. Then a cough. A thin, rattling, unmistakably childlike cough. Ava's feet stopped. Her breath hitched. She turned toward the alley, instincts from her hospital days flaring. She stepped over a puddle the size of a small lake and approached the sound. That's when she saw them. Two children. Barefoot. Shaking. Half hidden beneath a branch. Oh my God. Ava dropped her umbrella and ran. She knelt down fast, ignoring the water seeping through her jeans. "Hey, hey! Sweetheart, can you hear me?" she asked. Lila flinched but looked up. Her lips trembled. "My sister, she's really cold." "I know, baby. I know. I've got you," Ava whispered. She peeled off her coat and wrapped it around them both. She was trembling herself, from cold, from panic, from rage. Who had let these children slip through every crack? She dialed 911 with one hand, the other clutching Lacey's fragile wrist, checking her pulse. "Two girls, likely under 10, severe hypothermia, downtown by the old depot," she said quickly. "We need paramedics now." Then, without waiting, Ava lifted both girls into her arms, staggering under their weight. They were too light. Too quiet. She carried them down the alley, rain slapping her face, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. She didn't know where she was going exactly. But she knew one thing. These girls would never be invisible again. Not on her watch. The hospital's fluorescent lights hummed quietly, casting a sterile glow over everything. Ava sat motionless between the two beds in the pediatric observation unit, one hand resting on each twin's arm. Her coat, still damp, lay crumpled over the back of a plastic chair. Nurses had offered her coffee, a blanket, even told her she could go home now. She didn't move. She wasn't their mother. She wasn't even legally connected to them. But her heart was already tied in a knot that refused to loosen. Lacey stirred first. She blinked slowly at the ceiling, then turned her head toward Ava, lips chapped and eyes wide with the confusion of waking in a place that didn't smell like mold or fear. "Are we in trouble?" she whispered, voice dry as paper. Ava leaned closer. "No, sweetheart. You're safe. You're in a hospital. You're going to be okay." Then came a raspy murmur from the second bed. "Is my sister here?" "Lila." "Awake." Ava stood quickly and moved between them, holding their hands together. "She's right next to you, see? You stayed together." Lila turned her head slightly and saw Lacey. The tiniest smile crept to her lips, and her chest loosened with a sigh. For a while, no one spoke. The machines beeped gently. The IVs dripped. Outside the glass, a nurse passed with a clipboard. But inside that curtained-off square, a silent understanding formed. Later, when the social worker finally arrived, clipboard in hand, expression unreadable, Ava stood up. "They need someone who knows what to do," the woman said, politely firm. "They'll likely be placed in temporary shelter while we locate their last foster family." Ava's eyes darkened. They ran away from that foster home. That may be, but procedure. Procedure nearly let them die in a gutter, Ava snapped, her voice low but sharp. "Do you know how many kids end up like them, forgotten, passed around like they don't matter?" The woman hesitated, then glanced at the girls. "And you are?" "I'm the one who found them. I'm also a registered nurse. I lost my job, yes. But not my responsibility to people who need help." The social worker blinked, disarmed. By the end of that day, Ava had filled out more paperwork than she'd ever seen in her life. She wasn't allowed to take the girls home, but she was granted limited medical advocacy, just enough to visit them, speak for them during exams, and sit with them during assessments. She returned the next morning with clean clothes, donated blankets, and 2 stuffed animals she had fished from a donation bin behind the church thrift store. And that afternoon, something changed. Lila tugged on her sleeve. "Ava?" "Yes, honey?" "Do you know our names?" Ava knelt beside the bed, eyes soft. "Of course I do. Lila and Lacey." Lacey sat up a little straighter. "Most people don't remember." Ava smiled gently. "Well, I don't forget what's important." It was the first time either girl laughed. Just a soft, breathy giggle. But in Ava's chest, it sounded louder than any storm. The small courtroom on the 3rd floor of the county building wasn't made for moments like this. Its beige walls and flickering lights gave no hint of the battle being fought inside, not a battle of lawyers and objections, but of truth versus bureaucracy. Ava sat straight-backed on the hard wooden bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her hair was tied up neatly, her old nurse's badge clipped to her coat like a reminder of who she was, even without a paycheck. At the far end of the room sat Lila and Lacey with a court-appointed child advocate. They were dressed in donated sweaters, their matching braids tugged neatly over their shoulders. Their eyes, however, darted between faces with the weariness of children who had learned too early how adults can promise safety and then disappear. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Justice Myers, adjusted her glasses. "Ms. Monroe, we appreciate you being here today. I understand you've requested temporary guardianship?" Ava stood. "Yes, Your Honor." Opposing counsel, a stiff man with polished shoes and a clipped tone, rose immediately. "With respect, Your Honor, Ms. Monroe is not a relative, nor currently employed. She has no legal tie to the children. While her rescue effort is commendable, this is not a long-term solution." Ava felt her face burn. But she didn't flinch. "Your Honor," she began, voice steady but emotional, "I may not have the perfect resume. I've been out of work for months. But I've been with these girls since the night I found them freezing to death under a tree." The courtroom went silent. They didn't have names in the system. No one was looking. No one cared. She looked toward the twins, then back to the judge. "But I did. And I do." The judge raised a brow. "And you're prepared to provide for them?" "I've already started," Ava said. "Medical care. Daily visits. Emotional support. I filed for recertification to get back into community health nursing. I've also partnered with a local shelter to offer temporary housing. I may not have much, but I have enough love, enough time, and enough willpower to be what they need." Lila suddenly stood up. Small, but bold. "She tucks us in at night," she said, voice cracking. "Even when she can't stay, she calls." Lacey followed. "She makes us feel real." Even the child advocate paused. The judge looked down at her notes, then slowly up again. "And what would you say, Ms. Monroe, if I asked why you're doing all this?" Ava swallowed hard. "Because no one did it for me when I needed it. And I survived. But they shouldn't have to." The room was still. The opposing counsel shifted but didn't object. The judge sat back in her chair. In my years on this bench, I've seen many applicants with stronger finances, larger homes, and longer lists of qualifications. But I rarely see someone who already feels like home to the children they're fighting for. She picked up her pen and signed the file in front of her. Effective immediately, temporary guardianship of Lila and Lacey is granted to Ava Monroe. Gasps. Applause from the back. The girls burst from their chairs and ran straight into Ava's arms. She knelt down, sobbing into their shoulders. And for the first time in years, all three of them felt like they belonged to someone. Not because of paperwork. Because of love. 3 months later, the smell of cinnamon oatmeal filled the small kitchen of apartment 3B. Sunlight trickled through yellow curtains, casting warm shadows on the floor. The walls were no longer bare. Crayon drawings of trees, hearts, and stick figures with huge smiles decorated the refrigerator. On the counter sat a hand-painted flower pot with 3 names scribbled in purple marker: Ava, Lila, and Lacey. Ava stood at the stove, hair in a loose bun, humming an old lullaby she hadn't remembered she knew. She didn't hear the soft footsteps padding behind her until a voice chimed, "Can we add chocolate chips today?" She turned, wooden spoon in hand, to find Lila standing in a fuzzy blue robe, cheeks flushed from sleep. "Chocolate chips and oatmeal?" Ava laughed. "Who raised you?" Lacey appeared behind her sister, dragging a stuffed rabbit by the ear. "You did." "Technically." Ava dropped the spoon and knelt, pulling them both into a warm hug. It had been 3 months since the court hearing. 3 months of routines, bedtime stories, fevers and homework, laughter and tears. 3 months of becoming something she never thought she could be again, whole. There had been challenges, of course. Therapy sessions. Nights when Lacey would wake up crying from dreams she couldn't explain. Days when Lila refused to speak. But they always came back to Ava, to each other, to this tiny apartment that smelled like something baking and something healing. A knock came at the door. Ava opened it to find a delivery man holding a small envelope and a thin box. "Monroe?" he asked. "That's me." Inside the envelope was a letter, official, with a gold seal. Ava read it once, then twice. Her hands trembled. "Is it bad news?" Lila asked, peeking up. Ava knelt again, eyes glistening. "No, baby. It's incredible." She handed the girls the letter to read aloud: certified license reinstatement approved, pediatric nurse practitioner, community care program. Lacey beamed. "You're a nurse again?" Ava nodded. "A real one. Full time." Then she opened the box. Inside was a badge, clipped to a new lanyard, and a handwritten note from the clinic director: "The world needs people like you. Welcome back." Later that evening, they celebrated with cheap cupcakes and juice boxes on the living room floor. The girls danced barefoot to an old pop song, giggling as Ava spun them one by one. Afterward, as the sun dipped below the window and the city lights blinked on, Ava tucked them into their bunk beds. "Do you know," she whispered, "how proud I am of you?" They nodded. "Do you know," Lila said softly, "how much we love you?" Ava blinked through a rush of tears. Every day, more than yesterday. The girls closed their eyes. Sleep came fast. Ava stepped onto the small balcony. The air was cool, the breeze light. Far below, traffic whispered along the street. She looked up at the stars. "I found them under a tree," she said aloud, to no one in particular. "But I think they saved me just as much." Behind her, Lila stirred and mumbled, "Ava?" "Yes, sweetheart? Will we always be a team?" Ava smiled, eyes still on the sky. "Forever and then some." Storytelling and beyond. Subscribe now for more heartwarming, real-life inspired stories that remind us sometimes family is not who you're born to, but who you hold on to.